This story originally appeared on the amazing Beyond the Headline podcast. Check it out for free wherever you find your podcasts. On March the 7th, 2009, a skinny young forward came off the bench to make his debut for Santos. He was only 17, but most people already knew his name. He was a prodigy, soon to become the chosen one of Brazilian football. On the other side of the world, Liverpool were battling for a first league title since 1990. They ultimately fell short, but they weren't to know it would take another 11 years for them to finally achieve their goal. And they certainly weren't to know then that over in Brazil, those first steps onto the pitch for a kid called Neymar were also the first steps in a chain of events that would eventually make Liverpool European, world and English champions. This is the story of Neymar's move from Barcelona to PSG, the transfer that changed the world. Neymar was already famous before he played that first game for Santos. At age 14, he'd been invited to train with Real Madrid. He'd been interviewed countless times by TV shows desperate to find the next Brazilian prodigy, and he quickly became the key man not only for Santos, but for the national team too. Now, it wasn't a case of if he would move to Europe, but when and to who, and in 2013, he chose Barcelona. After a difficult first season, he began to deliver on his promise, forming the deadly MSN forward line with Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez. Together, they won 2 league titles, 4 Copa del Reys and the Champions League, claiming all 3 trophies in 2014-15 for Barca's second ever treble. And in 2017, the idea that he would leave was unlikely but possible. The idea that he would leave for a rich upstart like PSG was unthinkable. And yet, ironically, it was a game against PSG that persuaded him to do exactly that. In the quarter-finals of the 2016-17 Champions League, Neymar inspired one of the greatest comebacks, La Remontada, as Barcelona scored 3 times after the 88th minute against PSG to complete one of football's great reversals. Neymar scored twice and set up Sergio Roberto's 95th minute clincher. But it was Messi, not Neymar, who was lauded afterwards. Messi was still the king, and at that moment it seemed to Neymar that there was nothing he could do to step out of the royal shadow. That was the game that persuaded Neymar he had to strike out on his own. Now, to find his own team, he knew that the previous summer PSG had tried to sign him. So, after a meeting between Neymar Sr. and PSG owner Nasser El Khelaïfi, the wheels were set in motion for an extraordinary move to Paris. Barcelona, of course, had no interest in selling, but that didn't matter if PSG had the money to pay his buyout clause. And, backed by the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund, money was not a problem. They provided the required €222 million, and Neymar was their player. Despite some off-pitch difficulties and stories of discontent, he took PSG to a higher level of European competition, all the way to the 2020 Champions League final, and has made them genuine contenders rather than just moneyed upstarts. And the rest of France has benefited too. Neymar's arrival boosted international interest in Liga like no single player ever has, more than Zlatan Ibrahimovic, more than David Beckham. TV contracts have increased, sponsorship is up, and games across the country sell out weeks in advance because people want to see Neymar. But while PSG thrived, Barcelona spiraled. They had suddenly lost the man who they thought would one day replace Messi, but they had plenty of money in the bank. At least, if they spent it wisely, they could rebuild their team. Instead, they panicked. They spent north of €100 million on Ousmane Dembélé, a promising but raw forward who only a year earlier had cost Borussia Dortmund just €15 million. And then there was Philippe Coutinho. They'd been interested in Liverpool's playmaker for some time, but that interest became an obsession. The following January, they bought him for a fee that could eventually rise to €180 million. In a few months, they had spent the entire Neymar windfall and then some on 2 players that would be severe disappointments. Dembélé has been injury-prone and inconsistent, Coutinho eventually sent out on loan, and to add a further layer of humiliation, was part of the Bayern Munich team that humiliated Barca 8-2 in the 2020 Champions League. Those 2 missteps are the most high-profile examples of a club that have turned wasting money into an art form. Over the last few years, they have surrounded Messi with mediocre and aging players, sometimes both. The stagnation that ensued led to the state of chaos in which they currently find themselves. Messi doing his best to leave, and President Josep Maria Bartomeu forced out. For Liverpool, the opposite happened. Unlike Barcelona, they used their colossal stack of cash very wisely. Virgil van Dijk was already on his way by the time the Coutinho money came in, but without that money, they would not have been able to also buy Alisson Becker and Fabinho. Back in 2018, Liverpool were a thrilling attacking unit, but were just as likely to concede a stupid goal as to score a glorious one. However, with Van Dijk, Alisson and Fabinho in the team, their team now had a spine to go with the heart and brain. Without those players, they would almost certainly not have won the Champions League, nor the World Club Cup, nor, after 30 years of trying, the Premier League. And without the money from Coutinho, there was no way they could have afforded them all. Neymar's move to PSG would have been extraordinary on its own. The unthinkably massive fee, which more than doubled the world transfer record and may well never be broken, ensured that. But it's the ripple effects that made it so extraordinary. This single transfer made PSG a major player in Europe, it boosted the football economy of a whole country, it contributed to the decay of Barcelona and Lionel Messi's desire to leave, and it allowed Liverpool to break a 30-year curse. This was the transfer that changed football. The story of Neymar's transfer and its ramifications is explored in depth in a 3-part series as part of the Beyond the Headline podcast. You can listen to it wherever you find your podcasts, and alternatively, you can sign up to The Athletic and listen ad-free on the app, and also gain exclusive access to the full library of editorial and audio work produced on a daily basis. See the link in the description for more, be sure to check out Beyond the Headline, and thanks for watching today's video.